Amen. This week we're continuing on with the second in the series of sermons where we're looking at Coach John Wooden's lessons and how those lessons apply to our life as persons of faith. You'll note in the insert, if you don't know much about John Wooden, there's a little blurb. And one of the reasons that we did choose Coach Wooden was not just his coaching prowess, but because he was a strong person of faith himself. This week's message almost seems self-evident in ways. We know how important doing the little things are, but one of the principles of his success, and I think for most of us it can follow right along the same pattern, that often the difference between success and failure is found in the little things. It's those little things that we either do right or that we fail to do. Lynn Shackelford was a player that played for Coach Wooden in some of his championship years in the 60s. And he said that Coach Wooden had hundreds of details that we had to do right. And he said from the very beginning, when you would start to practice, he would work on these details. There was logic to every move. They had to put their sweat socks on in a certain way to keep from getting blisters. They had to lace their shoes in just the proper way so their feet wouldn't get tired during the game. They had to wear their hair in certain ways so it wouldn't be an issue. They had to hold the ball in certain ways and dribble it in certain ways and pass it in certain ways. But all of these little details went together because Coach Wooden always explained that everything is related to everything else. Something we know from the world around us, from physics, from life, but it's true in everything. All little details are important. And Coach Wooden believed the way to excel was to do the little things in the right way, because they're the building blocks for our success. For him, there was no such thing as a trivial thing. Everything led to the foundations of building foundations for success. And he understood something that we understood as United Methodists. Our founder, John Wesley, would say to us, it's always important to strive to go on toward perfection. Coach Wooden would tell his players that they were to strive towards perfection. He believed that it was never attainable, but striving for perfection is always attainable. And as people of faith, isn't that what we're called to do? Aren't we to move on in our faith journey and to move on towards being perfect as we can? While doing the little things right prepares us to do big things well. I think that's one of the foundations of faith, isn't it? We first have to learn how to do the little things of our faith to be able to later on do big things that are important. And so we have to watch those things. Coach Wooden would give this illustration. He would say, have you ever looked at the wing on an airplane and you notice the rivets along the wing? If one of those is missing, it's not a big deal. If several are missing, the wing of the plane could fall off. And he said, paying attention to the little things. He said he never wanted in his program the little things to cause failure. In the church, I think it is the same thing. We must build on a foundation of little things that lead to success. Big things are accomplished by doing little things well. I think that's so critical. One of the coach's favorite things to say was, in all of his championships, in the 11 national championships he had, he said, other teams would always look at us holding the trophy up. And that's all they could see was us holding the trophy up. They failed to see all the little things that we did right in order to get to that moment. Sometimes in our life of faith, it's the same thing. We look at the big things that we think have to be done. We look at taking care of poverty or homelessness or solving the world's peace problems. And we look at all of those things and we say, wow, those are big things. How could I ever accomplish those things? Well, you're called to accomplish little things well first, and if we can all accomplish little things well, think about the difference it might make in our lives, in our church, in our community, and in our world, because it's what we're called to do. There was a book written, I don't know now, several years ago by Malcolm Gladwell. I love his writing, and this was the first in the series of books that he wrote, and it was called The Tipping Point. And he talks about in the book that seldom, even in things that we think are overnight successes, seldom is it one big thing that causes something to happen. He said you do all kinds of little things, and eventually what happens is you reach what? A tipping point. And it tips over, and it's like all of a sudden there's a success and great things are happening. And it's so important to recognize that, because he said, as you look at life, he says, first of all, things become contagious. And so when we start doing little things right, if we're doing things well in the church, if you're doing things well in your faith life, and other people recognize that, they begin to do things well, and it becomes contagious. And all of a sudden we have a lot of people working on striving to be the best person of faith they can by doing little things, and eventually the church reaches a tipping point. And we start to become the church that God is calling us to be. He said, it is often these things that we think are big are caused by little things added one on top of another. Now he gives an illustration that I was so fascinated by, because he says it's mathematically accurate, but I didn't have the courage to try it. And he says this, and I know we've got at least one engineer in this service. He says if you take a piece of paper and you fold it in half, and you do that 50 more times, you know how the paper begins to mount? How tall will the stack be? Any ideas? Any engineers want to render a guess?
And fold it 50 times.
Well, you could if it was big enough. Yes, you could. Yes, you did. If it was, you could start with a square mile, and you could fold it 50 times. So what will happen? Anybody know? George tried to say we can't do it. We can do it, but geometrically it will reach the thickness of a phone book. The height of a refrigerator? Any guesses? How about the distance between here and the sun? If you fold a single piece of paper 50 times according to geometric progression, it will reach from here to the sun. You doubt that? Look it up. Look it up. It's a fact. It's one of those facts we can't get our brain around. And it's the reason we can't get our brain around all the little things of faith that seem so minor and seem so small. It's like, oh, well, if we do all these little things, that doesn't mean our church is going to all of a sudden become this great church, because we're just doing these little things. But God knows also, by doing the little things right, they mount upon each other until all of a sudden success is at our hand. So this is all nice, but what does it mean for us practically as people of faith? I mean, what does it mean for you and I? Well, first of all, in doing little things, like we're supposed to, it gives us an opportunity to become Christ-like. Because if you look at what Jesus did, if you set aside his, the big healings that we couldn't do, so much of what he did was little things, talking to people, living with people, being with people. And we begin to do things right, they become a habit. And Coach Wooden would say, when things become a habit, it's habits that hold up under pressure. And so when the going gets tough, if we've established habits of faith, then we're going to continue to live by those things that we established. You see, for Wooden, there were no big things, only an accumulation of little things. And for us as people of faith, it's a great way to start approaching our faith walk. Success starts in our faith journey as we build from the ground up. You see, the secret of success, and Bob knows this, is doing little things the right way. And so that made me think this week, okay, that's all nice and well, but what the heck is Jim talking about? What are the little things I'm supposed to do well? So I decided I was going to do some Bible searching. And I decided to stay away from the Gospels, and mostly because those books after the Gospels were written to help churches understand how to live their life. That's what they were written for. So I thought if I could go into those letters, those epistles, and find out some highlights of little things that we could do well, and if you and I could start to do those, what a difference it might make in our lives and the life of our church. And there are several. The first place I stopped was in the book of Galatians, the 5th chapter. In that book, Paul talks about something that he calls the fruit of the Spirit. If you are a follower of God, these are the little things that should start happening, and these are the little things that you can work on in your life. And there are 7 of them. One of those is love. One is joy. How many of you have worked on joy in your life lately? Do you go around with a smile and try to be joyful? Such a little thing to do, isn't it? Think about that for a moment. The little thing of being joyful and what a difference it could make in your journey of faith. Patience. Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? You have to throw that one in there. I've always said I never pray for patience because I'm frightened that I'll get it. But patience is something I work on. And it's so important because it's a little thing being patient. But what does it do in those building blocks of building you into a person of faith? Kindness is another. Is it so difficult to be kind? I didn't say this first service, but I was thinking about that. You know, when I call about an issue, whether it's with a banking company or a real estate company or whatever it is, I always try to be super kind to the person because they're doing their job. And you know, I've got a lot more things out of being kind than I ever have of being pushy and angry. So it's a nice one to work on. It's a very nice one. Faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. All of those are fruit of the Spirit. Little things that can build us into big disciples of faith. Galatians in the 6th chapter says something else. It says, if we're disciples, we're going to carry each other's burdens. That doesn't seem so difficult, does it? It's a little thing. Can you reach out and help somebody around you that's needing some help today? Maybe it's just someone to listen to them or to talk to them. Who knows what it might be? But that's what we're asking. Carry each other's burdens. In Colossians, Paul says it a different way. He says there's some things you need to get rid of. That sounds good to me. What do we need to get rid of? Those little things we need to get rid of. Anger, malice, and slander. Think about that. If we could learn to say, okay, I'm not going to get angry at every little thing that comes down the road. I'm going to work on not getting angry when I'm driving a car. Ooh, that's a big one. I'm not going to get angry when little things happen at the office or in the family. I'm going to work on these little things. Also, I'm not going to slander. There's another amazing one. How many times do we inadvertently say something bad about someone else? And who's around to hear it? Our children, our co-workers, our friends. And if we have an opportunity to say, I'm going to work on that particular issue, it's that small little building block that builds us into disciples of faith. Book of James, which of course is probably my favorite. Well, I don't know. It's named after me, but I don't know if it's my favorite. But James says some great things. One of the things that James reminds us, it's such a little thing, is that we're called to be doers of the faith, not just hearers. That's really a little thing. So what we're asking is when you leave here today, you just don't say, oh, that was a very interesting message, but I'm going to respond to what those things that I heard, I'm going to try to do as well as hear. James also says that we should tame the tongue. Ooh, that's a hard one too, isn't it? It fits in with those slander earlier. But watch what we say. But one of my favorites that seems so simple, and maybe that makes it even more difficult, James says that we should humble ourselves in God's presence. Doesn't that seem easy? I mean, doesn't it seem like honestly what we should be doing? I mean, God's up here, we're down here. Should we work on humility? It's such a little thing, but it can grow such great things as it builds us into the spiritual people we're supposed to be. And finally, the last one I chose was from 1 John. And the epistle of 1 John is one of the love epistles. Now, I know I get accused of preaching on love a lot. By the way, guilty as charged. It seems to be a pretty big theme in the Bible to me. But in 1 John, it just says, if we demonstrate love, that simple little thing, we're really demonstrating to others that we know God. Isn't that so simple and so basic to our faith? Now, I could have chosen 50 more things out of the Scriptures, but these were all so basic to me and so much in the details that I wanted us to begin to think about how we might live out these things in our lives. What can we take with us today that we can begin to live out? Brother Lawrence said it this way: we ought not to weary of doing little things for the love of God. God regards not the greatness of the work, but the love with which the act was performed. Think about that. There are no small acts if they're performed with love. And so as you begin to take an examination of yourself and say, what can I do? What can I do to make a difference in my own walk, which will add to the building of the body of our church, to change the church, to change the community, to change the world? I'm not asking anyone to go out today and solve the homelessness problem in our community. I'm not asking anyone to go out and stop world hunger. I'm asking you to do what you can do, because the small things can make big differences. I was reminded of a story when I was preparing this week, and I may have even told it before. When you get to be my age, it's hard to remember when you've told a story and when you haven't. And luckily for many of you, it's hard for you to remember when you've heard it and when you haven't. So we'll just pretend that I haven't told it yet. It's a story about a young boy walking along the beach, and much like the beach I just went to that was full of starfish, this beach was full of starfish that were coming up and being grounded on the shore. And you know what happens when starfish are grounded on the shore? They die. And that happens to them. And this one day, this little boy was walking down the beach, and he's deciding he was going to throw starfish back into the ocean to save them. And there were hundreds of them. So he was doing what he could, and he was picking the starfish up, and he was throwing them back into the water. And he bumped into an older man on his journey, and the older man asked him what he was doing. And the young boy told him he was saving the lives by throwing the starfish into the ocean. And the man looked and said, there are hundreds of them. You can't make any difference. And the young boy looked at him and he said, I'm making a difference for the ones I throw back. You see, I'm not asking you to do everything today. I am asking you to see what God is asking you to do, so that you might respond to God, and you might build yourself into the disciple that God is calling you to be. And maybe you can just take our church along on the journey with you. Thanks be to God for the opportunity. Amen.